Welcome everyone, it's couture time in Paris and we're having our wonderful panel discussions here in our London studio. I've got an amazing set of panellists with me from all different disciplines of the creative industry, but I'll let you guys introduce yourself first.
Thank you. I'm Lucy Moore and I direct Claire de Ron Books in Soho, which is a specialist fashion, photography and art bookshop.
I'm Annabelle Neilson, writer and muse of Alexander McQueen.
Hi, I'm Juliette. I'm a producer of all forms of mediums, installations, music videos, commercials, short films and events, fashion shows.
Hi, I'm Tobias Klein. I'm a trained architect and educator at the Architectural Association. I run a multidisciplinary studio somewhere between art installation, interactive devices in East London, and recently shot some wonderful funny crystal works at Show Studio.
Now we're going to be talking about Iris van Herpen today, so I actually wanted to jump on what you just said, Tobias, because she is a very sort of interdisciplinary fashion designer. That's how she works, and she works across all different mediums and collaborates with a lot of different people. That's really central to her work. Tell me how you first became aware of Iris.
I think it's through the Architectural Association. There's a lot of courses in which the traditional picture of an architecture is relatively blurred. So actually a couple of the collaborators for her latest works, as well as for a lot of the 3D printed works, is actually done by trained architects with her in collaboration. So for instance, Julia Kerner, who works very closely with her, actually was taught as well at the Architectural Association over a couple of years. And so there's a lot of melting point between various disciplines, and so that's, I think, where through the mediums and through the range of technologies she's using, particular material combinations, there's a really strong overlaps between the discipline of architecture and fashion, between her interactive works, between the kind of tectonic aspects of it. So somehow there's at the moment, quite a renaissance, I would say, in terms of how different disciplines can actually start to communicate and actually create works together. So that's the melting point is, well, for the last 150 years at Bedford Square, the Architectural Association. So quite a nice school with a bar inside. Maybe the only place.
Do you find that she's really breaking boundaries? Because I always look at her work and think it's really sort of changing the way materials are used.
Yeah, I definitely, I think the profession, her work is very transcending from fashion design into all other disciplines that look up for her to reference for actually kind of how does she use materials in a way that I've never seen it before, how as well some materials are used in a way I thought wouldn't be possible to use, how some architectural elements like her very ornamental works, which kind of resonate a lot with Baroque and with the idea of, say, even ornamental works, starting to be somehow transcendent in the material that you can use, and that is differently used how, let's say, more traditional textiles would be used.
Because she does keep that history in there.
I think for architects there's a tremendous reference to her works, to the body of works.
But also in material, I think she still also keeps that history there with, sort of with the seams, with the style, with the cutting, and with, the elegance and the movement, and because even though when you look at some of her work, it's almost, because of the textiles and the materials she's using, you could sort of think that they would be very stiff or very whatever. They're not. They actually, they have a great deal of movement in them. They're very organic, yet very structured. And I think that's something really quite amazing, because she's managed to mould all of those, worlds, and yet keep that fashion element, which keeps that beauty.
I think it's as well in a very elegant and light way, while actually a tremendous amount of technology is needed to make it actually looks that seamlessly elegant and floating with actually the modulation of these materials. And that's, I think, as well one of the overlays where modulation of materials today becomes a large issue, be it from fashion design, I think her shoes are a testament to that, how to make that happen. Or like the materials we use today in architecture. I think there's a lot of the way how it's done, some of it highly computational and others very applied, is quite something that I'm quite inspired from, actually.
Do you think I think she's pushing boundaries at other designers that are kind of probably because they've been around for so long, wouldn't necessarily step over those lines, you know, because they're sort of, you know, that sort of safety that they, you know, what history says you should use, or what is comfortable. Whereas she's sort of moved away from comfortability, even though it doesn't necessarily, I'm not saying that makes her clothes look uncomfortable, but she's moved away from everything.
And it's interesting that you say that in the context of couture, because obviously it's Couture Week at the moment, and I think there's an amazing quote from Lacroix that you always see when anyone ever talks about couture, which is that couture is the laboratory of ideas, and it's the place where you should be, as you say, kind of stepping over the line and innovating. I'm interested in kind of what you guys think about that, and how you think couture is going to stay relevant, and if it's got to be people like Iris who are pushing materials forward, that's going to keep couture being...
I think she's probably part of the new generation. It's the same, she's making what we've only ever seen as an image, really, or like science fiction, like post-production, for instance, has been so forefront. What she does is create it in a very real sense, so we are able to wear things that people have only ever imagined before. And that, taking that and working with the new technologies and working with materials and being able to bend things that way has made it accessible to her, and she is that new generation. She's very young. It's like the new breed of directors who can do absolutely everything. You don't need to go to a Hollywood, you know, post-production house to make something look like it's $1 million movie or whatever. And she's got that, and I think that will only spread wider. I think what she's doing is showing everyone that it actually, even though hers is incredibly complex, but it will feed through, because ultimately it always will. And with people like her, it means that couture will always live. If you've got people like her giving that lifeblood to it, it will never die, because that's what it's about. It's about the whole lab of ideas. And that's what's really exciting and inspirational. I mean, my God, the girl's not even 30 or something, somewhere
just
around
30.
So she is in that, you know, whole thing. It will inspire others.
I love the fact that she's been sort of put this sort of label of the enfant terrible of fashion right now. And I mean, basically, as it's not in her character, but it is in her work. She is that, and people are, you know, kind of go, wow, you know, and that's really exciting. You want for that to happen, and that has to happen for something to move forward. And
she really delivers, doesn't she? It's not just what you look at. It's like, it's not just the fact that it looks amazing. It's the fact, like you were saying, it's like the wearability, the construct, and the, you know, and to actually be able to put that all in one is why she is, you know, doing couture. Why she's able to do it, and so many other people might have a fabulous, you know, few ideas, but the actual wearability and the actual, you know, the way you can actually make it work for you is something else entirely different. And I think that's what's...
I'm quite interested in the wearability side of her work as well.
I wanted to talk about this in this idea of, because we always talk about this in the couture discussions, but I do find it really interesting, which is fashion that's made for the exhibition, or fashion that's made just for the book, almost. And it would be really interesting to get your perspective on this, Lucy, because almost you feel like, does it matter that you can't wear it? Because if you can see it and if it's exhibited, it's still taking fashion forward, because of it's creating a garment that is worn in some sense on a model, perhaps not on someone in the street. But I'm quite have you noticed like an increased public interest in couture or in fashion? People often cite, you know, Savage Beauty as this turning point where the public got really excited about innovation in design and fashion. Have you noticed that?
I think there's definitely a real interest in cutting edge fashion, cutting edge construction, and maybe that also comes from the kind of current interdisciplinaryness, you know, between, say, so for example, I might have artists coming to the bookshop who would, whereas previously they may not have looked in the, you know, fashion section. Now there's a kind of complete ease, you know, across disciplines. So you might get artists drawing inspiration from the kind of structural aspects of something like her work, and you know, I think also to add to kind of what you were talking about, I think something that's the sophistication of Iris's clothes is to do, certainly with a kind of super avant-garde kind of technological aspect, but also the fact that the kind of relationship to his historical references is quite clear. So you see kind of connection to Elizabethan dress or you know, underwater kind of sea creatures, which have their own, you know, for like there's this whole thing, you know, we know more about the planets than we do about the world under the surface of the sea, you know, so these kind of like primordial creatures that can live without light or you know, do these kind of incredible things which seem to us, which then, in order for us to replicate them, we need like extremely sophisticated technology. But I think that's really interesting, this connection back to kind of through time backwards as well.
I mean, you referenced Savage Beauty, and I think that you know, that sort of time that's changed is a fashion being art, sculptural art, you know, whatever. And I do think that, you know, whereas before fashion was very much looked at as in a piece of clothing we wore, whatever, you know, now, you know, there have been people that have come past through time now, you know, Savage Beauty being seen more, I think it was more than even the Picasso show. You know, that people have realised that these you know, designers are, you know, yes, are artists, and what you just said as well, the referencing and the work that goes into the technical work that goes into these, you know, these pieces, you know, whether it's 11 pieces or 36 pieces, you know, and how much do they get worn, you know, out in the street, and how much are they? I think it's a good point. I think it's an interesting fact. I mean, when that show happened, which was the Atlantis show, it was very much like you were watching canvases. It was very much like you were watching paintings walk down a catwalk. And, you know, I mean, obviously we haven't quite had a look yet, but I think her work's has a lot of similarities to that. It is very much about the work, not about the model. But I mean, still, you know, you want to be able to wear the clothes.
But do you think, I question, because I do want to have a look at the clothes, but I've got one more kind of question about it, because I do think it's a different kind of accessibility, because people often presume that wearability makes something accessible because it means people can interact with it and people can see it. But I wonder, in a way, if things are completely unwearable, like for example some of the stuff that Iris did or even McQueen did, whether that is a different kind of accessibility because it means it's more likely to be exhibited, because we kind of, you mentioned the kind of fashion that people are enjoying, it is that most kind of avant-garde sense. So in a way, does it matter that it's not wearable because that's what's actually going to draw people into fashion? It's not so much the ready-to-wear pieces.
Yeah, but then, you know, there is always going to be that moment where somebody is going to be brave enough to turn up in that number, and then we're all going to go, oh my God.
Because we were talking about Bjork.
Someone's going to do it, and then we'll all, you know, lay at the feet.
But is that what pulls people into fashion? I guess that's what I'm asking.
It's excitement, it's drama, it's like, you know, you don't want everything to be able, you know, I mean...
Easy,
I mean, I was very excited by seeing Bjork wear, I mean, she was, for me, the early person who wore Iris. And it, you know, that sort of, you know, I mean, I don't see Bjork as a celebrity, I see her as an artist anyway, so it's not the kind of, but it you know, she's somebody who looks at, you know, art designers as artists, like she looks at, you know, whether it's her music or it's, you know, sculpture work or whatever, and she wears it, and she's very brave about it, and I think there are those characters that do go out there and are brave and wear those pieces. People might go, oh my God, what's she wearing? But you know, but in fact, they're also going, wow, you know, and you know, yes, that, you know, some pieces, you know, don't come. You might wear them out, and they don't come back quite the same shape as they did when they went out.
I wonder if that was
might be a slight problem.
Glass, you know, the glass number, you just think shit. That would be so dangerous.
Yeah, I think
well, on me anyway.
Probably hurt a few people along the way, possibly as well.
But Tobias, what drew you into fashion? Because I guess you come at this from a different perspective, because you're interested in the technologies, as you mentioned before. So was it seeing people wear it, or was it being like, how was this made? What?
Well, the funny thing, we're nearing relatively quickly a point in which we can shape any kind of idea into a form with a certain material behavior. It's more, I think, or what I quite enjoy about her work, is the idea of making certain forms and tectonic aspects possible within a historic framework, within an ornamentic framework, a very heavy ornamentic actually, quite enjoyable, but within total different material context. So I find it quite stimulating at the thought process on how do you, on the one hand side, use technologies not for the sake of it, how do you use materials moldable, and how do you create an argument within a line of work or within the continuous experiment of where form on the one hand side becomes, in the context of ornamentic, some kind of value, but on the other hand becomes as well a performance, like the materials themselves. A lot of her dresses are performing actually. So I find that a step forward from where fashion, or where a lot of the works that I've seen before are able to represent yet not perform yet. And there she's always in this borderline area of, like, with the electric dresses and with there's a lot of things where the process, or the splash dress, and a lot of things that kind of like all of a sudden become a performance in themselves, either a embedded performance, how it was made, or actually the work itself starts to be almost interactive, although not quite in this kind of kind of lights on it or something like that. That's like very dull fashion. It's in a very, very precise and performed fashion, which I find very, very thrilling and new to me, and quite maybe it's a bit strange, because I don't think it's like directly taking different fields of design into each other, but actually being in a trans way quite inspired, and being able to put that to a point, and every now and then inspire far larger crowds. And I think that's for me where things becomes quite interesting, and quite being an enfant terrible maybe, but being as well out of the fashion world completely an inspiration for a huge crowd of people and a huge discipline. And one does feel that in London quite a lot actually, when a new dress comes out, a new idea comes out, and all of a sudden you see a whole 3D print show pops up that in the next year goes to like London, Paris and New York and gets bigger and bigger, and all of a sudden you have this quite a rippling actually. In fact, a movement, yes, it's quite close to a movement actually.
Do you notice people come into the shop and there'll be like a topic or something that everyone's got really into? So 3D printing is a really good example, because it feels like every newspaper at the moment has something about 3D printing, but you get these kind of weird consciousnesses where everyone...
Since it premiered at South by Southwest, it's just gone from stronger to stronger. So obviously, 3D printing, 3D and 3D scanning has been around, 15 years. It's now, it's now really snowballing. There's so many more. It's become so much more accessible and also applicable to a day. I mean, I've even had my own kids done. So, it's that accessible.
Was it that cheap though?
Apparently there is somewhere you can get it done really cheap in the Tropicana.
It is much cheaper now.
I'm flying tomorrow and to Canada, and we're using actually 3D scanners in a large forest
so you can
area.
say on a 3D scanned plane?
No, but it becomes actually available. Like, we're scanning roughly 100 by 200 meters of forest with a ruin in there in a 3D model, and it's quite actually accessible by now.
That's amazing.
And that data then can be used where it becomes part of a construct, a model between it. This is quite a nice thing. These data malleability between various disciplines is one of the aspects that allows conversation actually, because before it was you needed to learn a trade that to a certain point to be able then to talk to somebody else. All of a sudden now it's far more about the ideas and not anymore about the how to make it. I think that made it democratized a little bit more to be able to actually have these conversations between different disciplines, because they use similar processes.
Should we look at what she's done this season? Because I feel like this is going to spark even more conversation. So this collection, it was called Wilderness Embodied. So this goes back to what you were saying, Lucy, about how she does kind of look at some of these incredible topics. She does look at nature. It's not all about... I quite like how she sort of marries tech exactly with nature. We'll go to close-ups because you can't see them that well in this picture, but the shoes are absolutely breathtaking.
I really want the shoes that are downstairs in shows.
They're incredible, aren't they?
Yeah.
Should we see the next look? So for me, this wasn't what I was expecting, especially this look. I think especially because of last season, I think of her work as quite spiky and almost, whereas there's a real softness to this. I think it's really interesting that she started to do ready to wear as well.
Which kind of says that, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's hinted at, definitely.
It's slipping into that kind of going that way, that she wants to kind of have a larger audience.
Yeah, and I think it's perfect for her that she has that ready to wear to pull in that audience, but she can still use her couture to kind of as the lab of ideas that we were talking about.
Wow.
What are your thoughts?
Look at those shoes.
I know they're
like David Lynch or
they're
something.
Incredible.
David Lynch.
We were talking before about how they were made, and we were trying to work it out because they are absolutely amazing.
They're sort of Lynch, but they're also kind of hairy mammoth feet.
Yeah.
You know? I do really see the natural so much in these.
I mean, it's a shame because I'd really like to see, because it looks like it's had, you know, the inside the material, it looks like it's been cut away almost like with knives and stuff. But you can't from here, from this distance, I can't really sort of gather what's happened with the material. Obviously you can see what's wrong with the shape, but it's the material that I'd really like to
it's hard to ascertain
see.
whether
Can we see
it's
the
like
close-up of the shoes?
like a gauze on something, or a...
See, I mean, I think that's incredibly wearable. Oh my god, open again. I mean, that's done with 3D printing. That must mapping or whatever, isn't it?
I would think so.
Yeah, I would think so.
I was just thinking, like, it's so elegantly done that it's not the general materiality of 3D printing that's rather like white and a bit sometimes glossy. Kind of, it feels like, can it be done out of leather? Oh no, it can't be.
No.
But somehow it does. It's
good,
not in your face. The kind of like, oh wow, there it's 3D printed, done.
It does. It looks like it's been taken out and hand cut from
somehow
leather. Exactly.
That's
but it's
quite
not.
nice when it's not for the sake of looking, but taking the material further and having to be interpreted by asking, like, well, it could be, but maybe not. But
it's so art, isn't it? Like art installation, sort of made by model makers.
How much you get your...
it just appears like a drawing as well, you know, so there's often, there's really this link back to something, to the creative process, you know, that's...
I think that's really interesting you said it, because people always talk about her like she's, you know, a very techie designer, and I think that's quite simplistic, because actually a lot of what she does, it's kind of very traditional in its view of design. You know, you draw something absolutely incredible and then you try and make that, and there's something very... And she talks about this, we interviewed her here actually, and she talks about how when she was at college, she wasn't techie at all. You know, she didn't even like using email or anything, she didn't like doing collaboration. Everything's changed, and I think there's an aspect of her, especially with the handmade, that's very traditional. But people are quite afraid of technology. I think when you do something techie, people
that's the thing I think I like so much about her, that I do see the quality of the handmade and the technology. I mean, it's a marriage. You know, she's found a way to marry these two disciplines beautifully, and that's the thing, beautifully. You know, there's nothing that's...
it's like she's put feet in knots, isn't it?
You see, this is like a rock formation. I mean, you know, it's incredibly organic, that.
I think organic's a really good word for her, because it goes back to what we were talking about. It never feels like technology for technology's sake. You know, it feels like it's...
I think there's maybe the kind of differentiation when I look at this between technology and craftsmanship, and somehow they're marrying actually. So the idea of techne and poiesis actually in her work quite often marries without being abstract. So it's applied, direct, and I understand it as a high level of craftsmanship within a digital contract. And that's quite something that is fascinating and amazing.
Yeah, she's almost made a contract between two worlds.
And quite often married by relatively, to my understanding, relatively classic ornaments and forms that are shining through, like the kind of mirroring duality of a couple of spirals. There's a lot of very Baroque elements that are able to work like almost like an intermediary between the technology part and the structure part, the fabric part, or the kind of like braiding through it. It's quite amazing, and I think it's a nice thing, because a new type of craftsmanship all of a sudden.
Yeah, you want to be able to see and touch it. That's the other thing. I mean, you know, you're looking at a flat image, you want to walk into that. You know, you really want to, you know, you want to dive in, you want to be there, you want to know exactly what's going on.
But it's not even
the pattern of the shape.
To walk around it.
So it could be incredibly old or really new. It's like almost like you could look at it like the actual. It could be like a Space Invader's head, or it could be an ancient mask.
So that's so astute when you say it's incredibly old but incredibly new, because that's what her stuff feels like, doesn't it? It feels like it grew out of the earth, but
like it's a medieval mask if you just look at the actual shape of it.
Can we talk a bit more about those shoes in terms of, so I'm going to pick your brains here, but how, if something's 3D printed, let's talk about how you'd be able to put that on. What's the material going to feel like? And
you'd choose your material. It could be a silicone, it could be...
It looks silicone.
You can kind of, you know...
Yeah, but by now you can
create it and then scan it.
But she does work with materials, manipulating materials. So she could have done pretty much anything. We don't know, really.
Yeah, that's a nice thing. It's not anymore like titanium. Oh, wow, the first person printing titanium. No, it's not anymore. I wouldn't know whether it's actually a leather within a skeleton that is actually maybe 3D printed, molded around it, or whether it's a latex over it. It's a quite interesting combination of materials.
The thing is, artists have been having to do this for years, because obviously, like for instance, I don't know, like Fiona Banner's, you know, aeroplane, or the, you know, the horse that was made out of elastic bands. You can't. The original might be made out of elastic bands, but it's not going to last. It'll disintegrate. So one has to come up with, you know, you go to a model making and you come up with the actual thing that's going to last forever, or as long as you know, a good long period of time. And you know, within, you know, prop making or model making for artists, for instance, that's been something that everyone's been exploring for a really long time in order to give the pieces of work longevity. While as, you know, perhaps you know, it's for the first time it's being reappropriated into a fashion sense, as we can actually wear it, because people will always find something, you know, cheaper, a cheaper way to make things. But that, you know, sometimes it's, you know, obviously as she's showing, she's, you know, it's not about, you know,
it's not about fast fashion.
Yeah, it's about the, you know, being able to actually execute your idea and have it, you know, being able to go out in it and wear it, whether, you know, no matter what the design is, it's just actually the functionality of it being possible if you can.
And beautiful.
Yes. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Let's not make it too functional, because it's not that functional.
Why we've kind of hinted at this before when we said that, you know, 3D printing's been around for a while, but why has there been, I don't know if anyone will know the answer to this because it's a big question, but why has there been such a kind of vogue for it so recently? What, is it people like Iris?
Because the 3D printer's getting made. That's why, as per, you know, they've premiered it in South by Southwest this year, so that's why it's suddenly become, you know, it's on the tip of everyone's tongue, because it could be accessible in every office and every school, which obviously completely changes.
Do you think it would change fashion? Do you think in 20 years' time we'll all be?
It's changing already.
Yeah.
As soon as it starts.
In 20 years' time, we might even have our own avatar, so we don't even have to go out.
But there's something.
And they can go out in our outfits.
For me, there's something quite very magical about this concept of being able to replicate a form without the need for any sort of contribution from the hand necessarily. And that doesn't have to, you know, of course we all love the idea that something's handcrafted or laborious, particularly in the context of couture, might have taken, you know, 25 hours to sew beautiful sequins onto something, but the idea that you can just have these forms made in front of you without just watching them appear, like, that's very magical actually.
But I also want to say that I would not want that to just go down one route and not to continue the other one, because it, you know, that the craftsmanship and that knowledge of craft, I think to lose that because you go down one route,
of course.
That would be really, really sad.
But that's what's so nice and in a way respectful about what she does, because it doesn't feel in any way, you know, like it's sticking two fingers up at what other couturiers are doing. It feels like she's marrying that with something very forward thinking.
But one day, will two fingers be stuck up at them? That would be sad.
Yeah,
it's like the extinct, you know, the black rhino getting extinct. You know,
What's happened?
You tasted mine.
Now this to me, this is quite red carpety. I know it's very simplistic to just look at a pretty dress and say that, but it got me thinking about.
Transparent.
We were talking about the kind.
It's quite red carpety. Who are you putting that on?
It's basically like
That brave woman.
But I want to talk about like music and fashion and the kind of women. The kind of women who wear these kind of pieces and how these get a voice, because people always talk about couture now and they say it's just red carpet, and to me this is relatively, you can see someone like Rihanna wearing that, it's quite kind of avant-garde. But is that good that fashion, that couture's kind of become, is that good that we have that forum for couture to be put out there, or is that some people seem quite critical of?
What, that a naked girl goes down the catwalk and then somebody else wears it to the red carpet?
No, the couture has become a thing about dressing celebrities rather than being about...
It always has been though. But surely, I mean, there's
Movie
never
stars
been a time. It's either you're, you know, either in court or, you know, it's just the people of the...
In court?
You know, in...
Criminal court?
No, you know, the people... Yeah, it's just anyone who's going to be able to wear it.
But also it makes sense, the connection with filmmaking and acting, you know, because fashion is about performance as well, and it's about constructing new identities, and that's what happens in films, and then it feels as if perhaps it's appropriate then that on the catwalk, I mean on the red carpet, you might wear something that's kind of makes you a new person.
I mean, I would definitely wear her clothes, without a doubt, 100%. You know,
that.
And I see that more on you.
Oh, I'm just knocking it off with the face.
Should we see the next?
Oh wow!
Now this to me is amazing.
Oh, that's insane.
This is like, I mean,
that is just amazing.
Like a weeping willow, isn't it?
Beautiful.
Exactly.
Yeah,
a weeping willow.
like a twisted one.
But also it could be seaweed floating in the sea.
Yeah,
I think that's what I love about it. You know, it could be
seaweed, definitely. Yeah.
And this goes back to what you were saying about the performative element of her clothes,
Yeah.
like completely.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
It must
be
make a
amazing
sound,
to see that actually how,
you know?
how it moves rather than the still.
I wonder if it does move. I'm quite curious because I mean, again, you know,
It
we
looks
can't
like
from
Because
here.
the splash dress doesn't move, and I think that's if you saw a picture of that, you would
Yeah,
presume
true.
that would move, and it doesn't.
But that's
which I
got a
think-
little bit of movement, even
It
though
looks like it does down here.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
But
But
again, I'm fascinated to know what it was made out of. Again, it's how it was created
It
because
looks
it's
like
definitely.
lichen as well, doesn't it, a bit?
But this gets
You know,
me
it's all
thinking
about
about
the air.
post-production, and you mentioned that before, Juliette, when we were talking about, you know, how there's no need for post-production, people can make things like this anyway, and I wonder why there's people wanting, because you know,
always a need.
you have that with, yeah, always a need in fashion.
There's always
But you get that with like Tim Walker, you know, that's his whole thing, that everything is made without any digital manipulation. And I wonder if that's almost a reaction to how airbrushed and photoshopped everything's become, that people want to be like, this is completely authentic, I made this, you know. It's not,
I've worked with Tim. It's like he just leaves you standing there, and then he just moves around the room depending on where he wants to take the photograph, and you're just static. You're just stood there. You're just stood there, and he does all the movement. And it's bizarre if you've ever been photographed, because normally you're trying to move and make new images, and he's the one who's doing.
He's the one doing it. But it's quite magical, I think, that that he makes those huge props, like and everything is real. It does remind me kind of Iris's work, this idea of, you know, nothing is fake, everything is. You've created this wonderful object without any.
It's like that amazing art director who does all of, you know, what's his name? Tim Burton's work.
Yeah.
And a lot of, you know, and that's what he can do. This kind of thing is you just, you know, if you're, for instance, like, obviously you wouldn't be able to, she'd just make an amazing, can you imagine like a film that had this kind of stuff, because this is it's a fantasy, and she's actually made it into a reality. When you think of all the films that you might have seen, just the most amazing, you know, pieces that have been put forward, which, you know, might be post-production. You know, post isn't just used to make people look beautiful or create a thing, it's also used to create the whole dynamic of a film. I mean, look at the planets, or, you know, look at Star Wars, for instance.
Yeah, I mean,
they
you do
shot
see
it
that.
in a green room, you know, and everything else is made. It's insane, and to see things that you would never think would exist for real, which is kind of what you were saying, that whole
Yeah, I wonder.
being able to create it now with the materials and the technology, and just finding whether it's actually created with that, or whether because of that it's in fact she's found a way to create it sort of more organically. Is, you know, we don't, you know, we're not here in her studio and sort of unpicking it sort of thing, but it's an utter delight to see.
To see it. And I love that we were talking about how futuristic it is, and I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this. I think
it's very romantic.
It's very
Yeah,
true to
it's
a
very
dress. It's very fashion. You know, that's quite a
It's like a
simple
wedding dress.
dress. You know, it's a one-shouldered dress. You imagine if that could be a completely normal chiffon dress that had been worn by someone in the sea, and that was what would happen if it was ripping apart. You know, it seems
With a
like,
wind
you know
machine.
when
Exactly.
you put when you're wrapping a present, and you take your scissors
And
and
you
you make
make
them,
them-
and it's sort of like a bit
It is
like
like
that.
that, yeah. But I love how simple
Do
the
it
shape
yourself.
is.
Right, go home to try it.
But it's also like
Remind me of that.
We've got a project.
I need a dress.
Yeah.
Sorry.
you know, it reminds me of Ophelia lying in the river surrounded by reeds. I mean, there's a
Because
it's
it's
a
not
kind of
traditional.
and narratival as well, you know, and again, in you think in terms of performance, you would just really feel a certain way wearing that. You would feel.
It's a fairy tale. I think.
It is, yeah, absolutely.
The boots look, I mean, the shoes look really big.
Yeah.
Don't
They're
they?
the counterpoint, aren't
Yeah.
they, to the kind of
It's great
romance
because
of
it
the
adds
dress.
the gravitas. It makes you sort
Yeah.
of feel really grounded. Whereas it would be quite sort of almost.
If you had a too delicate shoe, it would look
It'd
very
be too-
weird.
Bit Disney.
Should we see?
Yeah, but it makes it much more fashion. Oh wow.
Oh wow. The Lorax.
I love this because this is where she talks about different sort of elements coming off the body and it not being just as sort of, you know, two arms or two legs, and she wants to sort of extend the body out and give it other elements to it.
It never feels like she's being sort of unsympathetic to the female body. You know, it never feels like she's kind of not working with it. You know, it always feels like it's a very much a sort of a conversation she's having with what she wants to do with the clothes, but also how to make it fit around the form, which I think is really interesting.
It's especially particularly with this one, the way the hair kind of blends into the thing, so it's almost like it's all one form.
Yeah,
it's a brilliant casting.
It's a funny way of almost like...
You know, for the girl and the look and the makeup, it all really, really works so beautifully. I love her little hands just poking out.
It has a funny form of like post-hominal kind of, like post-natural state, kind of just in between convergent, like what is this? Almost like taxidermy that kind of is wrapped, but kind of coming from your own hair. It's a wonderful hybrid state, just between actually convergence almost, like you could compare it, I guess, why I like the work so much, a Borromini when actually Daphne turns, very classical, just turning into the tree, into the dendritic tree, and it's this kind of little moment where you do still see a structure, you see still a human, but there is a second stage to it where it kind of almost turns, and that's this kind of fragile stage in between that I find quite inspirational, quite amazing with the work. Even the little almost like bone and hats and stuff that are actually
Bird.
So it kind of is like a form of transformation, just in the, just almost like a stage in between with a very, very fast photography, just like where it started to transform.
And such a delicate little belt, just to sort of sew it all together.
And the idea of transformation that you meant, that's so interesting, because that's kind of what fashion is, and that's what couture is. You know, it's this idea of dressing up and turning yourself into someone new. And I love the way she explores that, but in such subtle and unexpected ways. It's beautiful.
Wow, it's almost like shark skin.
Annabelle, tell us a bit about what it's like to wear clothes like this, you know, and to model, and what's the role of a model in a show like this? Is it just to show off the clothes? Is it to embody? Is it to give them a sense of a personality and a story? Does it vary from show to show?
Yeah, I mean, I think if depending on the clothes, but and the designer, but with something like this and with McQueen and so, you know, the girls were very much picked for personalities and individual. You know, Lee never wanted people to be. It wasn't really about beauty so much. It was more about, you know, having, you know, something to say on while wearing the clothes. I mean, you know, I look at some of the girls who were with him. A lot of the girls were with him for a very long time. If you think about it, you know, and they had very much an individual element to them, as did the clothes. You know, there were moments obviously where he didn't want that at all, and then that would change because he wanted the clothes to stand out very much before. But very much in the early days, he wanted that sort of individual, striking, strong attitude. You know, a woman who knew what she wanted and was wearing what she wanted, and who could express the dress or the coat or whatever she was wearing, and make it as strong as the actual she was as strong as the piece she was wearing. I think that was quite important.
Is that the strength of a runway show? Because I was going to ask later, you know, is this the best context for us to see it in, or would it be better to see it in a film or a book or in an exhibition? But is there something that, you know, having someone wear it and move in it that makes it?
I mean, I believe shows are the best way to see them. Clothes, yeah, I do. I absolutely do think that I mean, yes, I've seen shows, I've done things in film. I did things like Alexander in film, but without a doubt, I think the best way, and if people have imaginations of the designers that, you know, create around that, so it's not just a walk in the park and walk down. I mean, I'm not particularly keen on that sort of just one walking down thing. I kind of like much more like the sort of idea of the opera and creating a kind of world around it, and that idea that you began from, you know, where you started. You know, for example, the girl who came down from the tree when he had the tree inside them. You know, there are many examples I could think of. But I do love it when people really put that sort of energy into the actual whole experience. And when you're going there, you're walking into the designer's sort of world, heart, imagination, you know, their creativity, where everything is spun, where the web has come from, you know, and you're just one of the flies that is being caught in this net, which, you know, and you're.
Yeah, I love that. I love that bit of it, you know, when people really take that care to make it a whole experience.
And a story as well.
Yeah, with the music and the lights and the, you know, the whole, and it's so quickly over, but it's so, it really sets the tone and gives you an emotional connection in which sometimes, you know, with imagery, you might, you know, we look at that so much quicker, or, you know, and you get caught up. It's like going to see a film or going to see your favourite. You know, it's got that connection that you would never.
It brings
get
everything
otherwise.
to life so much more. Your imagination, you leave there in a dream. You leave there with that in your mind and in your dream. And to be honest with you, I think that that's much more powerful than people having advertising. I mean, I know people do advertising and have to have advertising, but I mean, the shows that I've seen of people when they've really gone all out there and they have a big story to tell, I'm so affected by those shows much more than when I've just seen somebody do. I mean, agreeably, it costs a lot of money, and you know, not everybody can do that. But if they can, I think it brings a lot to it.
That's why exhibiting fashion is so important, because as you say, if people were interacting with fashion on the internet or in magazines, and I mean people outside of fashion, that exhibition, it does, in a way that the runway show does, kind of convey that story and that message, and gives people that emotional chance to interact with the clothes. Because otherwise, your average person who doesn't work in fashion or attend a show, their interaction with fashion is limited to, as you say, seeing adverts in a magazine.
Again, I think it depends on how the show is put together. Really importantly, who creates it, who puts it together, how they make those clothes move. Because again, they'll be static. You need to be able to have an understanding that what happens on a catwalk. These girls, you know, people think it's just walking. They're not just walking. They're doing a job. They you know, they create an idea. They create, you know, they're talking to the designer and identity, and you know, they bring that to life. So when you're doing and creating a show in a museum, you need to be able to find a person who's very knows about clothes and understands how to make that feel. And I think that's why Savage Beauty works so well, because it was created so brilliantly.
So perfectly.
Yeah.
What are the kind of fashion books that people are engaging with? Is it the ones where it's a designer's world? Is it the ones where it's what's people's interest at the moment? Can you notice a trend in that, or is it?
I think there's, you know, definitely a kind of reliance on the monograph, the fashion monograph, on individual designers and on their history. But increasingly, well, historically too, I guess, designers look outside of their world. You know, they don't come in and want to look at the work of another designer. It just doesn't make sense. And I think it's difficult actually in both a book and in an exhibition to articulate the kind of subtleties of dress and of clothing, because they're intricately linked to, you know, gesture and voice and environment, and, you know, things like, you know, the wind, or are you inside or outside, are you sweaty or cold, or I think it's actually really hard to communicate those intricacies in a book or an exhibition. I mean, I don't know if you'd agree with that, but it just feels like that's why a show is much better.
Yeah, I agree with you, 100%.
Just going back to the books and the whole thing about that, I think in your place you've got that book which actually gives you, I was just thinking how it would respond with Iris's work, but it gives you the breakdown on how you create like you know, and how, you know, do you remember in the 80s, for instance, how radical their designs were, and then you've got a book where you break it all down, and you can, so whoever would be interested would be able to see how to make those kind of, you know, patterns, and what creates it, and how you cut it, and how you do it. And I was just thinking how that now transfers with this kind of revolution, because that was a revolution.
Because it's much more interesting
how we saw,
for me, for example, looking at something like, you know, I was looking at Janet Arnold's patterns of fashion this morning, just thinking about, you know, the kind of the technicality of Elizabethan dress or something, and that's what's interesting to me in terms of fashion books, or, you know, documenting textiles from sort of Southern Africa, or, you know, like it's there's that sort of technological side is really interesting.
But when now we feed it into the 3D printer, and voila, you have it in like 6 hours.
But when you're going back to the thing of books and more the general public, not the people who, let's say, are passionate about fashion, you know, or kind of just kind of want to have a piece of it, or know a little bit more about it, or want to pick up a book and go, wow, that's really beautiful. I mean, you know, the holograms that have been done, and using different ways to slightly bring things more to life, I think works for people. I think if anything, if you see something flat, I mean, fine, if it's amazing, fine, it's great, you know, this doesn't seem that flat, but still you can't get in there, you're not, even I, who knows what fashion, you know, quite well versed in fashion, still would like to be in there, you know, and be able to touch it. So it's finding ways, I think, with books and stuff like that, where you kind of feel, particularly for people who aren't so aware or knowledgeable about fashion, but yet are becoming more interested in it and seeing it more as an art sort of form, I suppose. It's finding a way of producing books that I think kind of allow them in more.
And of course,
it is quite a sort of high end sort of hierarchy of sort of, you know, it's difficult to understand, I think, if you're not sort of part of the industry.
Yeah, it's difficult to translate, I think, difficult to make it seem invigorating and exciting. That's what's brilliant with Iris, because it does that just with the catwalk shot.
But we haven't mentioned the wonderful, you know, fashion photographer who that's their role, right?
Yeah.
That's what Nick does. And, you know, when you have a beautiful book of fashion photography, then you understand the clothes in a particular way that's specific to the image, to the two-dimensional image, and to the book. And that's, you know, for me, those are the really exciting books.
It's a shame with Iris that we're not seeing her stuff shot more. Obviously, this goes back to the business side of fashion and advertisers and all that, the hierarchies and politics of fashion. But, you know, she's a small designer in many sense. So she's not a big brand, and it's a shame that you don't see her work, I think, in a fashion context more. I think people that know her, they love it, and they admire it perhaps on the internet and in the exhibitions that she's done. And
I think people probably wouldn't see it as being very accessible to, as you said, to wear.
Yeah, and let's get her off Bjork and on Rihanna.
But even just to see something like this in you know, Vogue or something frequently, so it's something that people can engage with, because it's brilliant to see it in an exhibition context, but that kind of fetishizes it and it takes it away from fashion in a way and makes it its own thing, when actually this is so relevant to change. We all said, you know, digital printing in 20 years' time.
I mean, I look at that now and I don't see that far off coming out as somebody wearing that at all. I'd wear that without a doubt. For sure. You know, so I think maybe, as you said, she's going into ready to wear. This probably is a show more directed into so it's because it is much more wearable. She's crossing that boundary. She knows where she's going. I've seen that with a few designers who've done that at a certain point in their career and gone, okay, this is the time. Everybody's looking at me. This is the time I need to push forward.
I mean, look at that.
And I think that
would look amazing on you.
Now we're shopping.
Yeah. But wouldn't it? It's just. I mean, that's.
I mean, I don't think there's only been one or two that I probably would have said I'd have to find something quite special to wear it to, where I didn't have too many people around me. But
Tobias, you were going to say something. You were on the break.
Can we go back one image just quickly? Because I think it's when you talked about environment, obviously from an architectural point of view, at one point of being trained as that, it's quite interesting, because if one takes the basis of her work, or a lot of the work, and it's quite clear in a lot of the ornament actually, and that even with the floor of the catwalk is quite directly the reference to that. It's the architectural ornament and translation into the kind of embodied ornament on the dress, in the kind of fashion that she creates. I think there's creating a narrative, creating an environment on the one hand side, but although I agree with the points of that it should be shown in a show most rather than an exhibition, it's quite interesting how far her works is actually translated into other environments. I mean, 2 days ago I was speaking to the Science Museum, and they actually are thinking of getting a dress. Now that's on the absolute end of actually science, and obviously it's a Science Museum, so in some form, there's maybe some culture in there, but it's called Science Museum for a reason. On the other hand side, it actually transcends to be a negotiator between a very classic ornament on the floor, between some shoes that are somewhere between roots and seaweed and kind of absolute like organic things, and then again actually kind of picking up elements that on the symmetry, on the kind of shape, on the kind of narrative that completes an environment. And I find it quite amazing how that transcends and is not actually bound in only a fashion package. It's quite wide going.
I agree with what you're saying about the ornament, because this girl could almost be a vase in a way on a tabletop. You know, it's like almost like.
But it doesn't feel insulting that it's
I find it absolutely amazing. Like I'm quite fascinated by how actually the fashion or the photography picks up as well so much of the floor, and kind of how this floor becomes part of the entire environment. I very much enjoy this in it.
But in terms of what the ornament actually references, for me it's the natural and also that sort of animalistic, and reminds me of, you know, women surrealists they referenced myths, and normally myths involving animals, in order to kind of challenge the dominant kind of paradigms of femininity in the early 20th century. And like, to me, that these reference that that kind of, because they're all sort of half animal, half plant, half animal, half.
And there's a strength to them, but also like a real weakness. You know, we talked about that weeping willow. It's so fragile in a sense, but there's a real sort of majesty and strength to the girl wearing that, which I find.
And it's almost like the inside.
So this is like a very much
well.
almost like a lizard kind of effect with this.
And I think it's really impressive that she marries the technology with things that are so organic and natural, and it doesn't seem strange. It doesn't jar.
feel forced at all. It's very.
No.
That's nice. I definitely wear that.
Yeah, I know. We're all just like. You've mentioned that a few times about technology being used sort of for the sake of it. Are you seeing that quite a lot? And that must be quite frustrating.
I mean, to be honest, there's a culture at the moment going through from product design, industrial design, architecture, a lot of architecture that is bored with the press a button, get a product out, because we can do this already. So it is far more about like, what are the composite materials? Like, one is scale, of course, to build a 3D printer that builds a whole house. But there are people who are doing this already, so this is not even part of it. It's more like, how does this enable us to create different materials and different performances of materials or composite materials, and how do we then create with that actually narrative or design? And I think that's when it doesn't scream at like, look at me, I can 3D print, and that is the most amazing thing. Because we've kind of passed that already. It's like
it's not really
all these
relevant,
white models and white jewelleries that are just crystal white, beautiful done. I mean, in my own work, they're just becoming a substrate to work with other chemicals, materials, environments. If they stay just for the sake of, they are actually more representation rather than product, or rather than actual the piece that comes out of it. So it's almost like having a painting of something rather than having the thing. If it just actually is printed, So I think that's quite amazing. And I love that she didn't follow, because when she did the first entirely 3D printed dress, I was like, oh my god, hopefully there's not gonna be like 20 of those or so, because that would, it's one, and that's amazing and done, and moving on with it actually to test it in different materials, different combinations, and I thought that's quite the agility of it actually, and the freshness of the work. So that this doesn't scream 3D printing at all. I think it's very, very good.
It's really nice that the execution isn't, it's just about the end.
Yeah.
Oh, there she is. Should we give her a clap? Because she's so cute.
What's she wearing?
I'm thinking where she's dead.
Should we see some close-ups? Because I feel like we're going to get a lot from... We've seen the shoes. Let's talk a bit, to root this back to couture, because obviously it is Couture Week at the moment, what this says about we talked a bit about this at the start, but what this says about how couture is changing, what this says about what couture means, because I think there's been a long time where people have been quite scathing about couture and its relevance. What do you guys think about that?
I kind of thought we covered that one already.
Yeah?
So,
but do you think couture is really...
Sorry, I meant, as we said that she was being...
You're like, I don't want to talk about that.
No, but I just thought that because we said that obviously she's being... So it's a bit like she's bringing it, dragging everyone.
But have you always thought that couture is important? There's never been points where any of you guys have been like...
I don't know.
Questioned it.
I always have, personally. Because it allows so much freedom for the designer.
For the designer.
And that they're allowed to use any material. I hate the money point of it, but I suppose the wealth of what they're allowed to do.
Yeah.
And people how far they're allowed to take what they want to do. With the workmanship that's given to them, the amount of people who are working on one piece, and the details and everything. It's on a different scale. I mean, and obviously that's why the people who buy them have to be, ridiculously super rich. But I mean, obviously it's a massive separation, but between who wears that sort of stuff and the reality. But what really I think is the great part of couture is what designers are able to express and show, and the sort of what they can create with the houses of couture. Yeah. So I think there's relevance there, and I think it does allow for them to to explode, which I think is a great thing.
But why haven't designers been doing that? Because I think that's what I find interesting with couture is quite recently, I think some of the, you mentioned this before, like some of the bigger names, they've made it easy for themselves. They've used it as like a bit of theatre, a nice tool to sell some lipsticks. Yeah. They haven't used it.
Yeah, it does seem like there's been a few years of it being a bit like, maybe it's just a lack of ideas. Maybe there's a bit of a drought on. You have time.
Periods, doesn't it? Of times when people ebbs and flows. So because I mean, this is obviously there's no drought here, which is great. We're not seeing a drought, but again, sometimes houses, and there's lots of changes that have been going on. A lot of changes, I think, in fashion houses, and people who aren't there anymore, people who've gone, people passed away. Just it's changed, and sometimes it takes time for the right people to then. It's got so small present. Now as well, hasn't it? Tiny. It's really, really small compared to. I mean, obviously, 300 years ago, you had to have it. Everything was couture.
And all the fashionable women wore couture. I was talking to Juliette, the fashion historian, and she was like a few 20, 30 years ago, she's like, anyone that worked in fashion, we would buy haute couture. This was what we'd engage with. This would be the most avant-garde fashion out there, and obviously that's completely moved to ready-to-wear. That's where the trends are. But this feels like actually this is.
She's taking a bit of control back,
but in a proper way.
She's taking a bit of control back, I think, for the couture.
And it's saying that moving forward isn't just like a new trend every 6 months. It's actually really moving fashion in a completely new direction.
It feels very generous. If one would say in comparison that you can build a house and you can live in that, you don't need actually an architect for that. You might need an engineer for this, and that's fine. And it might worse. You kind of keep warm and all that. That's fine. But you do every now and then need an architect to create something beyond the functionality. Now, a couture seems to be, and that's from an outside point of view, a very generous cultural creation. So it's something that, of course, it's not for the purpose of just dressing, etc. It's actually making a very generous statement and creating this elaborate story, creating a bit of culture. So I find that there's something quite generous about her show and about how she actually put this together in this elaborate story. And as you said, it's not one of the big names. It's actually a particular, smaller, very innovative, bringing something to the point in a show, creating a narrative, a story. No? I think this is quite, it's that generous, very elegant.
That's a lovely note to end on. I think that's so positive. No one's going to say anything more articulate than that. Should we give her another round of applause for you guys and for her?